Friends, thank you for being here today. I want you to cast your minds back for a moment. Think about the defining moments in Canadian history where our sovereignty directly intersected with American ambition. Some of you remember the bitter debates of 1988, when we were told that free trade and deep economic integration with the United States would somehow cement our standing in the world. Many more of you remember the sting of 1959. You remember the Avro Arrow, the most advanced supersonic interceptor on the planet, an absolute masterpiece of Canadian engineering, unceremoniously scrapped and cut into pieces. And why? Largely because Washington preferred we buy their missiles rather than build an independent defense industry that could rival their own. If there are any of you watching right now who remember the day the Diefenbaker government canceled the Arrow, I want you to go down to the comments and tell us exactly how that felt. Share that history, because that national scar is exactly why the events of this past week matter so much. For nearly 7 decades, that has been the unwritten rule of North American geopolitics. The deal was simple. Canada may govern its territory, but when it comes to continental defense and grand strategy, Washington sets the menu and Ottawa asks for permission before ordering. We have watched successive administrations, both liberal and conservative, tiptoe around American sensitivities. We have endured the loud, chaotic, and often insulting rhetoric from the South. We've seen the threats of aluminum and steel tariffs. And more recently, we've listened to Donald Trump's bizarre public musings about acquiring Greenland, all while treating Canada as a weak, underfunded 51st state. We are used to the noise. We are used to the bluster. But recently, in the freezing air of Yellowknife, standing at the joint northern headquarters of the Canadian Armed Forces, something fundamentally shifted in the tectonic plates of global power. Prime Minister Mark Carney delivered a speech that did not feature the usual diplomatic platitudes. He didn't pound his fist on a podium. He didn't issue a loud, boastful challenge in the style of an American cable news pundit. Instead, with the quiet, devastating precision that has always been the hallmark of true Canadian statecraft, he laid a checkmate on the geopolitical chessboard. We will no longer rely on others to defend our Arctic security or to fuel our economy. Those were his exact words. To the untrained ear, it sounds like standard political fare. But to the analysts sitting in the Pentagon and to the strategists in Moscow and Beijing, that sentence was an earthquake. It was a $35 billion declaration of independence. Today, we are going to look past the mainstream headlines. We are going to look at the verified records, the global supply chains, and the military procurement data to understand exactly how Canada just quietly outmaneuvered the United States and why Washington is not going to like what comes next. To truly grasp the magnitude of what just happened, we have to look first at the ice itself and the military reality that Washington has been pointing at for years. Since early 2026, Donald Trump has made a political sport out of pointing at Canada's north, and we must be intellectually honest here. He was not entirely wrong about the vulnerability. He was only wrong about our response to it. A 2024 report, confirmed by our own Department of National Defense, painted a grim picture. Our military equipment readiness had fallen below 50%. We had roughly 200 soldiers, mostly our dedicated but lightly equipped rangers on snowmobiles, patrolling an Arctic territory twice the size of Western Europe. Across the ice, Russia operates 100,000 troops and a fleet of 40 heavy icebreakers. Next door, the United States maintains 22,000 highly equipped soldiers in Alaska alone. Washington looked at this canyon of capability and assumed what they have always assumed, that Canada would eventually have to come begging for the United States to extend its security umbrella over the Northwest Passage. They assumed we would surrender our sovereignty in exchange for their protection. It is the classic American playbook: create a dependency, then dictate the terms. Instead, Ottawa announced an immediate unilateral $35 billion investment, 4 new military bases, 800 kilometers of strategic highway, and a deep-water port on an ocean that the world's great powers are currently racing to control. Canada did not ask Washington to coordinate this. Canada did not wait for NORAD's permission. But the true shockwave didn't come from the bases or the highways. The real masterstroke, the decision that is causing absolute heartburn in the halls of the Pentagon, came from beneath the surface of the water. When asked about the upcoming NATO exercises in northern Norway alongside 25,000 Allied soldiers, Carney confirmed that Canada is in the final stages of procuring a fleet of 12 conventionally powered submarines. The bids were locked in on March 2nd. The contract is valued at roughly $40 billion Canadian. And here is the detail that changes everything. The detail the mainstream media is glossing over. Canada is not buying American. The two finalists are Germany's ThyssenKrupp Marine Systems and South Korea's Hanwha Ocean. The globe is watching Ottawa weigh a split purchase. German Type 222s for the Atlantic and South Korean KSS-3s for the Pacific. You might be asking, why does this matter? Why does this anger the American defense establishment so deeply? Because, my friends, military procurement is never just about the machine. It is about the leash attached to it. When you buy American military hardware, you buy into the American logistical ecosystem. You rely on their maintenance schedules, their proprietary software, their replacement parts, and ultimately, their political goodwill. The United States manufactures nuclear submarines. They wanted to integrate Canada into their maritime defense grid as a subordinate partner, much like they did with Australia under the AUKUS deal. By choosing German and Korean manufacturers, Canada is intentionally severing that logistical umbilical cord. We are building a fleet specifically designed to operate independently in Arctic waters without American oversight, without American maintenance contracts, and without the political strings that inevitably come attached to Washington's favors. I want to pause here and ask the veterans and the military history buffs watching this. Do you agree with this move? Do you think locking the Americans out of our submarine logistics was the right call for Canadian sovereignty? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below, because this is a massive historic shift. Yet, as any student of history knows, military hardware is just the shell. Economic leverage is the engine. And that brings us to the second, perhaps more vital piece of the puzzle: the global resource chessboard. Right now, Canada is quietly seizing control of a global engine that the United States has historically dominated. As we speak, the global energy market is experiencing a massive shock. The escalation of the U.S.-Israeli conflict with Iran in early March 2026 has deeply destabilized the Middle East. Oil prices briefly spiked to $120 a barrel, but more importantly, the conflict has choked off vital shipping lanes. Reuters has confirmed that 20% of the world's liquefied natural gas, or LNG supply, is currently trapped behind a closed Gulf choke point. The economies of Asia, specifically Japan and South Korea, our vital democratic allies, are facing an existential energy crisis. For decades, the United States has used its energy dominance and its control of global sea lanes to dictate foreign policy. They have used it as leverage over Europe, and they have certainly tried to use it as leverage over us. But look at what is happening right now in British Columbia. In June 2025, Canada quietly shipped its first LNG cargo to South Korea from the brand-new export terminal in Kitimat. By November, 25 massive cargoes had crossed the Pacific. Energy Now reports that LNG Canada is rapidly ramping up output specifically to fill the Asian supply gap created by the Middle Eastern War. Do you see the sequence of events? The United States is currently bogged down in another chaotic, unpredictable Middle Eastern conflict that is severely disrupting global supply chains. Meanwhile, Canada, calmly, reliably, and without firing a single shot, has positioned itself as the indispensable alternative energy supplier to the Indo-Pacific. When Carney said in Yellowknife that we will unleash a range of new economic opportunities, he was not speaking in political abstractions. The Arctic infrastructure announced last week is not just for moving troops. It is designed to unlock critical minerals, new energy corridors, and hydro capacity. It is about creating a supply chain that runs entirely within Canadian borders and exits through Canadian ports. This is the ultimate shield against American economic bullying. We have engineered a strategic bypass around the United States. But the LNG shipments are only the first half of this economic equation. To understand the true depth of the panic currently rippling through the think tanks in Washington, we have to look at what physically sits beneath the permafrost in those newly secured northern corridors and how Canada is brilliantly weaponizing it. We all know that the 21st century is not going to be fought over oil in the same way the 20th century was. The new global battleground is the supply chain for critical minerals: cobalt, lithium, graphite, nickel, and rare earth elements. These are the building blocks of the modern world. You cannot build an electric vehicle battery without them. You cannot build an advanced semiconductor without them. And, most importantly for the Pentagon, you cannot build a modern fighter jet, a guided missile system, or a nuclear submarine without them. Right now, the United States is locked in a desperate, existential technological Cold War with Beijing over access to these exact materials. Washington is terrified, and rightfully so, because for the last 2 decades, they allowed their own domestic mining and refining capabilities to hollow out. They outsourced their industrial base, and now they are dangerously dependent on foreign supply chains. This is where Donald Trump's loud, aggressive America First doctrine hits a solid, immovable brick wall. You cannot put America first if you do not possess the raw materials to actually build the things you need to survive. And where are some of the largest, most secure, untapped deposits of these critical minerals on the entire planet? They are sitting right under the ice in the Canadian North. In decades past, we all know exactly how this story would have played out. An American administration would have applied immense political pressure. A Canadian government would have quietly folded, and we would have sold the raw dirt, unsecured and at a discount, straight down to Texas or Ohio for them to process, refine, and sell back to us at an exorbitant premium. It was the classic colonial economic model that we tolerated for far too long. We were treated as America's polite, compliant warehouse. But that is exactly what the Yellowknife announcement upended. When Carney announced the deepwater ports and the 800 kilometers of strategic highway, he wasn't just pouring asphalt, he was building a closed-loop supply chain that explicitly bypasses the United States. We are now establishing the infrastructure to extract these minerals, process them using our own expanding northern hydro capacity, and then ship them directly to our democratic allies in Asia and Europe from our own sovereign ports. We are cutting out the middleman, and the middleman is furious. Think about the psychological and political leverage this gives us. The next time Washington tries to weaponize trade, the next time a populist politician threatens to tear up a trade agreement or slap arbitrary tariffs on Canadian goods to score cheap applause in the Rust Belt, Ottawa does not need to scramble a delegation to beg for a reprieve. We can simply look at the Pentagon, look at Silicon Valley, and calmly remind them that the titanium and cobalt keeping their aerospace and tech industries afloat comes from our backyard. We hold the keys to their national security, and for the first time in our modern history, we are acting like we know it. And we aren't doing it alone. This is the other half of the strategy that the loud voices in American media are completely missing. Look at who Carney flew to meet immediately after the Yellowknife speech. He didn't fly to Washington to brief the president. He didn't go seeking validation in the Oval Office. He flew to Norway. He stood shoulder to shoulder with the German Chancellor and the Norwegian Prime Minister. He is actively coordinating with the leadership in Japan and South Korea. What Canada is doing right now is quietly assembling a syndicate of highly advanced democratic middle powers. Ask yourselves, what do Berlin, Tokyo, Oslo, Seoul, and Ottawa all have in common right now? They are all deeply exhausted by the chaotic, emotional, and wildly unpredictable nature of American politics. They are tired of their national security and economic stability being held hostage by whoever happens to win a swing state in the U.S. election every 4 years. Canada is offering these nations a stable, reliable, rule-of-law alternative. We are telling Germany, you don't need to rely on the U.S. for your defense logistics. Build our submarines and let's integrate our naval strategies. We are telling Japan and South Korea, you don't need to worry about the Middle East exploding or U.S.-China trade wars. Buy our LNG and our critical minerals. We are becoming the indispensable anchor of a new geopolitical bloc, a coalition of the competent. But I am curious what you think about this. Can a unified coalition of middle powers actually hold the line against the economic bullying of superpowers like the US and China? Start a debate in the comments, because this is uncharted territory for Canadian diplomacy. But let's be brutally honest with ourselves for a moment. All the submarines in the Atlantic, all the LNG terminals on the Pacific, and all the critical minerals under the ice mean absolutely nothing if we fail to secure the very foundation of our nation, the people who actually stand on the permafrost. This brings us to a truth that is often ignored in the war rooms of Washington and Moscow, the reality of human sovereignty. In 1958, Prime Minister John Diefenbaker stood before the nation and spoke passionately of a northern vision. He promised roads to resources, airstrips, and a grand railway pushing into the Arctic. It was a beautiful dream, and almost none of it was built. The generation watching this today remembers those broken promises. You remember the decades of lip service paid to the North, while the actual people living there were treated as an afterthought. True sovereignty is not just planting a flag in the ice. True sovereignty is a human endeavor. You cannot claim to own a territory if the people living there cannot participate in the prosperity of the nation. During his speech in Yellowknife, Carney did something incredibly rare for a politician. He indicted his own institution. He acknowledged the failures of the past 68 years. And when pressed by a journalist about the staggering inequalities in the North, he did not deflect. He looked directly at the camera and said, "There is a deficit." That admission matters. The numbers are a national disgrace. The Auditor General's May 2025 report confirmed that more than 60% of Nunavummiut rely on public housing, and 45% of that housing is critically overcrowded. We have situations where 15 Canadian citizens are forced to live in a space designed for 4. Look across the water to Nuuk, the capital of Greenland, a territory with 20,000 people. They have 6 hospitals. Iqaluit, the capital of Nunavut, with double the population, has 1. You cannot ask citizens to defend a nation that cannot even provide them with a roof or a doctor. The new doctrine recognizes that human infrastructure is military infrastructure. The extension of the Nutrition North Canada subsidy, injecting $30 million specifically to lower the exorbitant food costs in 124 isolated communities, where fuel runs 6 to 10 times the southern rate, is a defense expenditure. The Taltson Hydro expansion, which will double the Northwest Territories' clean electricity capacity and serve 70% of its residents, is a sovereignty operation. The 700 new housing units announced for Nunavut are as critical to our national defense as the armor on our ships. Canada's approach to the Arctic is not about matching Russia's icebreakers hull for hull, or engaging in the loud, chest-thumping militarism of the United States. It is about rendering our North incontestable by making it prosperous, populated, and fully integrated into the Canadian economy. It is a mature, civilized approach to geopolitics. It relies on international law, human development, and quiet economic strength. Now, I know exactly what you're thinking. We are Canadians. We are pragmatists. We have lived through too much history to take a politician's word at face value, and we have been burned before. So, where does this leave us? What is the final verdict on this grand northern strategy? Carney has laid out a brilliant blueprint. The commitments are vast, but the institutional track record of the Canadian government gives us serious pause. Bloomberg confirmed that $32 billion of the $35 billion announced was actually money set aside by the previous government back in 2022 for NORAD modernization. It sat there for 4 years. Contracts were not tendered, hangars were not built. Furthermore, the Major Projects Office, the very body created in August 2025 to fast-track these crucial approvals, has, as of this week, approved exactly 0 projects. 0. We are standing at a crossroads, and history is watching which path Ottawa takes. One path is the path of execution. This is the path where the bureaucratic red tape is finally slashed, where the submarine bids transition into signed contracts, where the LNG terminals continue to scale, and the coalition with Norway, Japan, and Germany solidifies into a formidable counterweight to American hegemony. If we take this path, the generation that waited nearly 70 years for Diefenbaker's vision to materialize will finally see their country act with the speed, dignity, and power that the modern world demands. The other path is the path of the past. It is the path where $32 billion sits untouched while committees study the environmental impact of studying the environmental impact. It is the path where the housing crisis in the North remains a tragedy, and our sovereignty remains a talking point at press conferences rather than a reality on the ground. Washington is betting heavily on that second path. They are betting that Canada is too polite, too bureaucratic, and too slow to actually execute this quiet checkmate. They are betting that we will eventually fold, just as we did with the Avro Arrow, and return to our comfortable position as their junior partner. But I look at the LNG ships leaving Kitimat. I look at the non-American submarine bids sitting on the desk in Ottawa. I look at a prime minister willing to stand in Yellowknife and declare that the era of asking for permission is over. We do not need to shout. We do not need to insult our neighbors. We only need to build. We have the resources. We have the strategic high ground. And for the first time in a long time, we seem to have the geopolitical courage to use them. The chessboard is set. The pieces have been moved. Now, we watch to see if Ottawa can bring it home. So, I am turning the final question over to you. Which path do you believe Ottawa will actually take? Option A, where we finally execute and build this nation, or option B, where the bureaucracy swallows the ambition once again? Cast your vote in the comments right now. I read every single one, and I want to know where Canadians stand on this historic moment. Until then, keep a close eye on the North. Hold your leaders accountable for the concrete they pour, not the speeches they give. Thank you for your time. Take care of yourselves and take care of your fellow Canadians.